and today's film starts with Andre, a young African American who walks down the street on a moonless night in a suburban neighborhood. A car starts to steadily follow him, and Andre gets very nervous, and at some point, somebody gets out of the car and ambushes him and renders him unconscious. We then see Rose, sweet pastries and coffee in hand, and she's taken her boyfriend Chris to meet her parents today. This might be quite precarious for Chris, given that he's black and her parents don't actually know that he is yet. She is his first white love interest and he is her first black man. Their journey becomes a symphony of tense undertones as Chris reaches for a cigarette, only to be rebuffed by Rose's concern for her parents' perceptions about him smoking. A conversation with Rod, Chris's friend and a local TSA agent, weaves in threads of humor, jealousy, and a forewarning about the impending visit. Amid their conversation, a deer gets into their path, which was quite unnerving and stops their conversation for a second. And in the aftermath, an exchange with a police officer underscores the racial divide, making everything that much more tense for Chris. And even though the cop was trying to make Chris uncomfortable, Rose intercepts and defends her man. After they continue their journey, they reach their destination, and it was a beautiful mansion which was home to Rose's parents. Her parents are Dean, the neurosurgeon, and the mysteriously aloof hypnotherapist, Missy. A subtle tension curls around Chris as he declines Missy's offer of hypnotherapy to cure his smoking addiction, a refusal to surrender his consciousness to her expertise. And things are not really as they seem, as the beautiful setting hides a disconcerting truth. Two African-American staff members, Walter and Georgina, who despite their polite veneer, radiate an odd, chilling artificiality. They have this sense of personality that's from a bygone era, a striking contrast to their perfectly groomed personas. Dean's tour of the family's legacy brushes over a photograph, his father, a truck runner humbled by the legendary Jesse Owens. The narrative takes a detour to introduce Rose's brother, a surgeon like his dad, albeit with a rocky past. An afternoon tea party becomes a stage for an unexpected revelation about Chris's life, and his voice wavers as he recounts his father's desertion and his mother's tragic demise in a hit-and-run accident. Amid the changed atmosphere, Georgina's robotic malfunctioning while pouring tea sends tremors of uneasiness coursing through the room. Later, a lively and noisy dinner brings Jeremy into the spotlight, and his drunken fascination with MMA and Chris's potential is met with Chris's refusal to entertain the idea. A palpable sigh of relief echoes as Jeremy is coaxed to retire, leaving Chris and Rose to retreat to their rooms and drown their shared awkwardness. The veil of night is lifted as Chris steals away a smoke, only to encounter the groundskeeper Walter charging at him with a surreal display of aggression. The housekeeper Georgina is no less unsettling, her hollow reflection staring back from the window. With his heart pounding, Chris retraces his steps, only to be coerced by Missy's offer to help him quit smoking. Unaware that he's walked into her psychological web, he succumbs to her coaxing, which plunges him into the terrifying revisit of the night his mother perished. The intense dread of a young Chris resonates in his adult self as his nails dig into the chair. The final tap on the teacup engulfs him into an abyss of darkness, a chilling embodiment of the term, get out. In the morning, Chris awakens from the gasp of a haunting nightmare half remembered. He reaches for his phone, only to see his friend Rod trying to intoxicate his dog. Sharing his cloudy recollection of the previous night's encounter with Rose's mom, he reveals his suspicion. Had he been hypnotized? And soon, the mansion's gates open to welcome the Armitage's affluent friends, a motley crowd of aging white folk, their privilege echoing louder than their words. As they fawn over Chris, their so-called compliments are laden with stereotypes and microaggressions, and some of the topics of conversation were his physique, his perceived skill in sports, and apparently his supposed prowess in bed. Their assumptions creating an unsettling carnival of ignorance. A brief respite comes in the form of Jim Hudson, a blind art dealer whose reputation precedes him. Despite his own lack of vision, he appreciates Chris's photographic work and visions of a young man's artistic eye. Their conversation is heavy with tumult, yet Chris can't help but feel an uncomfortable undercurrent in the ironic circumstance of a blind connoisseur of visual art. Wait, hold on. Did you subscribe to our channel? Come on guys, you're here, you're watching the video. Help us out by hitting the subscribe button, as it really helps out me and my team to make more videos for you guys. And now, let's get back to the recap. Venturing back into the social hurricane, Chris comes across another black man, mirroring his own age, but carries a strange robotic demeanor similar to that of Walter's and Georgina's. Chris attempts to connect, but the man's facade remains unbroken, and a sense of familiarity nudges at the back of Chris's mind. With another strange encounter to report, Chris reaches for his phone only to find it disconnected once more. As he reconnects with Ron over the phone, his friend's warnings ricochet in his mind. White people, sex slaves, and the urgent need to escape. Rose interrupts, chalking up his concerns to paranoia and discomfort, and Chris finds himself begrudgingly swayed. Before she leaves, Rod implores Chris to photograph the strange black man for recognition. Georgina arrives then, apologies falling from her lips for the second phone mishap. Chris attempts to assuage her guilt, inadvertently stirring an emotional response that leaves her shedding a solitary tear, pledging her loyalty to the Armitages. Determined to uncover the familiar man's identity, Chris approaches him, phone in hand, but his attempt at discretion fails spectacularly as the flash goes off, triggering a drastic shift in the man's demeanor. From polite to deranged, he lunges at Chris with a chilling warning: "Get out." The aftermath is a swirl of confusion and fear. Dean brushes it off as a seizure induced by the flash, but Chris and Rose, shaken to their core, are not really convinced. As they retreat for a private walk, Chris voices his uneasiness and his desires to leave, and Rose, her own doubts creeping in, acquiesces. Their imminent departure remains shrouded in mystery as Rose ponders what lies she could concoct to explain their early exit. A macabre spectacle unfolds in the parlor where Dean presides over a silent auction, the faces of the affluent attendees reflecting a strange intensity. On display is a photograph of Chris, his unknowing face a trophy for these elder bidders. Amidst the chaos of rising bingo cards, it's Jim Hudson who emerges victorious, laying claim to an unknowable prize. As the guests disperse, the veneer of the party crumbles to reveal something far more sinister. Anxiety mounts as Chris returns to pack, interrupted by Rod's startling revelation. Dre, the man in the photo, a familiar face now lost to the world, once filled the seat in their local cinema. Chris's phone dies out and casts an eerie silence over the room. Compelled to investigate an open closet door, Chris uncovers a Pandora's box of sorts, containing photographic evidence of Rose's past love interests, who were all black men, including Walter and Georgina, and they all had this bizarre robotic expression that he had come to know. A shocking realization dawns. Chris is not the first and perhaps not the last. In a fit of panic, Chris confronts Rose, requesting the car keys under the guise of loading their luggage. Her avoidance and evasion begins a chilling ballet as they navigate the house, the walls closing in around them. Jeremy blocks their path, his aggressive stance foreshadowing the betrayal to come. And the devastating truth is revealed with Rose's chilling admission, "You know I can't give you the keys." And Jeremy lunges at Chris, and the sound of a teaspoon tapping a glass sends Chris spiraling into a dark abyss. Rod, haunted by his friend's fate, finds himself at the police station, laying out his fears of a racially motivated kidnapping scheme. But his desperation is only met with laughter and is considered ludicrous. Chris regains consciousness, trapped in a chair beneath the watchful gaze of a mounted deerhead. His surroundings morph into a grim theater as an old television set flickers to life, and Dean's father holding court with ominous promises of immortality. The relentless ting of a teaspoon returns, echoing in his mind, and the darkness takes hold once more. In the ensuing silence, Rod's call connects, Rose's voice floating through the line. Her well-rehearsed concern and the concocted tale of Chris's departure sparks suspicion, forcing Rod to record their conversation. His attempts at interrogation are hindered by her deflections, her accusations of his infatuation, ending their conversation in a flurry of anger. Awakening once more, Chris is confronted by Jim Hudson on the screen, a grotesque puppet show outlining their nefarious plan, a brain sweep, and the promise of a new site. A second life. The dark void, it seems, is Chris's destiny, a passenger in his own body, and as the spoon chimes its ominous notes, Chris plunges back into the abyss. In the dimly lit basement of the Armitage family's sinister estate, Dean and Jeremy meticulously prepare Jim Hudson for a gruesome brain transplant. The tension in the air is palpable as Dean instructs Jeremy to fetch Chris, their unwilling participant in this twisted procedure. Jeremy strides down the shadowy hallway, the chilling sound of his footsteps echoing through the basement. He discovers Chris seemingly unconscious and bound to a chair, and as Jeremy removes Chris's restraints and prepares an IV, a cunning glint appears in Chris's eyes. He had cleverly stuffed padding from the chair into his ears to block the hypnotic sound of the teaspoon. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Chris knocks out Jeremy cold. Dean, growing impatient, calls out for Jeremy and ventures out of the lab. Chris uses this opportunity to ambush Dean, impaling him with deer antlers from the adjacent room. In the chaos, a candle is knocked over, igniting the blanket covering Jim Hudson, who screams in agony. Meanwhile, Rose remains blissfully unaware of the carnage unfolding beneath her. With earbuds in, she listens to music while browsing images of attractive black men with chiseled physiques, her twisted desires on full display. Chris ascends the stairs and confronts Missy, who desperately reaches for her teacup and spoon, but Chris, however, shatters the cup before she can use it against him. Missy lunges at him with a knife, but Chris turns the weapon on her and stabs her to death. As Chris makes his way to the front door, Jeremy reappears, putting him in a chokehold. Chris struggles to open the door, but Jeremy repeatedly kicks it shut. On the third attempt, Chris stabs Jeremy in the leg and brutally crushes his skull. Fleeing the house, Chris jumps into Jeremy's car, where he finds the medieval helmet from earlier. As he speeds down the driveway, he accidentally hits Georgina, and haunted by the memories of his mother, Chris couldn't leave her behind and brings her onto his car, but suddenly Georgina awakens and attacks him, and her wig falls off to reveal a scar from her own brain transplant. The car crashes into a tree, killing Georgina, and the sound of the crash reaches Rose, who grabs a rifle and pursues Chris. As she fires at him, Walter, referred to as Grandpa by Rose, tackles Chris to the ground. In the midst of the struggle, Chris snaps a photo of Walter, and the flash breaks his trance. Walter then turns on Rose, shooting her in the stomach before taking his own life. Rose lies on the ground, blood pooling around her, and as Chris looms over her, she whispers that she loves him. Chris begins to choke her out, but ultimately couldn't bring himself to finish the job. Just then, a police car arrives and Rose weakly calls for help, hoping to see Chris arrested. But to her dismay, it was Rod who steps out of the car, having tracked down his friend. And the film concludes as Chris and Rod leave the grisly scene behind, driving away into the night as Rose takes her final breath. The chilling events of the Armitage estate serve as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life. And that is how our movie today wraps up. I hope you guys enjoyed our recaps. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and most of all, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys on my next recap. I love you all so much. Bye.